The Last Jedi is out in theaters, but does it live up to the Star Wars name? Well, kind of. This review will be filled with story spoilers, so watch this at your own discretion. The movie opens up with the evacuation of the Resistance. They had begun to leave the planet when the First Order fleet shows up to destroy them for good. This particular intro reminds me of a mission in the Nintendo GameCube game Rogue Squadron 2, where you must hold off Imperial forces while the rebels leave Yavin right after the destruction of the first Death Star. The Last Jedi starts off okay, but it feels a bit rushed in parts of the film. This is where I have a problem with this movie, in that the pacing feels uneven. The First Order brings out this massive ship that can decimate bases with ease, so Poe decides to try and distract them. This isn't a problem, but the inclusion of a "your mom" joke completely took me out of the film, and I just shook my head and groaned. This is the kind of problem I had with The Force Awakens, in that it shoves out-of-place jokes in here and does not feel like a movie set in the Star Wars universe. There are very random jokes included that don't fit and feel like the writing fits the tone or lore. I would be fine with jokes in Star Wars if they made sense, and I can envision the characters saying things like that. This leads to the First Order tracking and catching up to the Resistance and dealing a major blow to them by destroying the bridge of the ship and killing the majority of their leaders. Unfortunately, this does not evoke any emotion for me as I watched it, due to the fact that they just gloss over it quickly, and there are no big consequences the characters have. Like, characters like Admiral Akbar get killed, and he says maybe one or two lines, and then he just dies. I found myself in disbelief, and Leia somehow surviving and using the Force to propel herself back to her ship left me confused. After all this, a new leader is appointed, and Poe, Finn, BB-8, and this new character Rose go on their own mission to help the Resistance escape from the First Order. It seems to me that the movie cuts back and forth to Rey and Luke and Finn and Poe very often. It felt very jarring to see so many back and forth moments happening fairly quickly. Once Luke takes his lightsaber from Rey, he does the opposite of what people expect and throws it away. This idea of subverting your expectations of movie tropes will play a huge role in this film. It becomes extremely predictable as you start to think what they're trying to do and do things differently from what you expect. As Rey tries to enlist Luke's help, she and Kylo begin to communicate through the Force. She senses his conflict of light and dark and tries to bring him back to the light. Luke begins to, quote-unquote, train Rey, but not in the way you would think. All he teaches her is the mistakes of the Jedi and how they created Darth Vader and gave Emperor Palpatine time and resources to erode the Republic and make the Empire. This is actually where I found the movie more interesting, as it begun to talk about possible Grey Jedi instead. Instead of always going either light or dark, maybe this new trilogy would explore Luke making Rey a Grey Jedi. This would have gotten me fully on board with this movie, at the very least, since it has never been explored in a main Star Wars movie. It has certainly been talked about in books, the now Legends universe, and shows like the Clone Wars or Rebels. Games like Knights of the Old Republic or Knights of the Old Republic 2 touch upon this as well. Unfortunately, they don't explore this aspect, and it goes back to being the typical light versus dark side. We find out that Luke wanted to kill Kylo because he sensed Snoke's influence on him, but this is a huge conflict with Luke's character in general. This movie even tells Luke that he has managed to bring Darth Vader back to the light, but for some reason he refused to do it with his nephew. He immediately decided to not attempt to help his family member and just wanted to end Kylo's life. This does not sound like something Luke would do, as we know from Return of the Jedi, where Leia told Luke that it was futile to try to bring Darth Vader back. Luke has never listened to people when his mind's made up, such as Luke leaving for Cloud City to rescue his friends and abandoning his Jedi training in the meantime. And he does what he believes to be the right thing. Killing his nephew is a huge character conflict, and it makes it more obvious the writers don't fully understand these characters. After Rey learns of this, she leaves to try to bring Kylo back to the good side. This leads to an unusual cameo of Yoda. I say unusual in not a good way, only because if there was any Force ghost Luke would call on, it would be Obi-Wan Kenobi. It would be Obi-Wan who opened Luke's eyes to the Force, the rebellion, who was his father's friend and mentor. Yoda did not care for his father as nearly as much and viewed him as dangerous and not in full control of his emotions. He actually didn't want Anakin Skywalker to be inducted in the Jedi Order, for many reasons. This is the first cameo that doesn't do much for this plot. The second has to be Admiral Ackbar, like I said, since Force Awakens, as he barely is involved in these past two movies. He's just there, basically. The film cuts back to Finn, Rose, BB, and BB-8, and definitely where the movie needed to be condensed. Casino felt pointless and a time waster, where you can honestly leave for 5 or so minutes and you can come back without missing anything major in the plot. They hire a conveniently placed thief, who is in the same jail cell as them, who is able to break into Snoke's ship so they can disable the tracker. They fail to disable it and are taken captive by Captain Phasma. This leads to the codebreaker to predictably betray them to save his own skin. Honestly, he felt unnecessary, and a bit of a throwaway character, in my opinion. Rey gets on board Snoke's ship to try and convince Kylo to stay away from the dark side. Here we find out that Snoke was responsible for the mind link between Rey and Kylo to lure Luke. Once he finds Luke's location, he orders Kylo to kill Rey, but he actually kills Snoke instead. At this point in the film, it becomes predictable, and I didn't expect Rey to join Kylo in ruling the galaxy. While this was happening, Poe declared mutiny and tried to buy Finn time to disable the tracker, but is subdued by a now conscious Leia. They decide to evacuate the warship, and Leia's friend stays behind to distract the First Order. Phasma dies less than 15 minutes after her appearance in this movie, and essentially wasting her character completely. This leads to the final battle that is very reminiscent of the Battle of Hoth. A character tries to tell the audience that it's not salt, not snow. It's salt, not snow, but it's a poor excuse for another very similar aspect from the original trilogy. The Millennium Falcon shows up to take out TIE fighters, and they use another piece of nostalgia when in Return of the Jedi, it is going through the second Death Star. It even actually plays the same song that was playing at that time. For whatever reason, Rose, the mechanic, falls in love with Finn, and she saves his life from his kamikaze run into the battering ram Death Star laser. For all the screen time they gave to Rose, I still feel she's an unimportant character. Then a conveniently placed Luke shows up to buy the Resistance time to escape the derelict Rebel base. Kylo tries to shoot Luke with his army's weapons, but he survives unscathed, and they duel a bit very shortly. We find out that Luke has apparently used a force projection technique to distract them, and then dies due to the extreme effort required to maintain that technique. The Resistance escapes and the film ends. So this movie has tried to explain some of the issues with the first film, but unfortunately, I think they created new ones. The amount of things that go unexplained is troublesome, such as how did Snoke ever come to power? This wasn't a problem with Emperor Palpatine since we first saw him in Empire Strikes Back, since we know the Empire has been in power for a while by then. He didn't create problems, only he added mystery of a mentor to the fearsome Darth Vader. Rey is never explained how she is so powerful or skilled. They tease her parents' identity, but then it falls flat when Kylo just says to her that he knows they were just nobodies who sold her. The mystery and intrigue is lost once they mention this. Personally, I don't think Kylo is being truthful, but we'll find out in the next movie if he's lying. I still wonder why Rey is so adept with the Millennium Falcon and to go so far as to instruct Chewbacca to listen to her orders. This is something The Force Awakens never explained, why she is as knowledgeable with this ship as Han Solo or Chewbacca. From A New Hope, Chewbacca didn't even like Luke. He growled at him. So I don't understand why he's so okay with Rey. Her personal motivation has never been strong, but now it's barely there since there is seemingly nothing that ties her into the conflict besides having come across BB-8 and Finn in The Force Awakens. At least with Luke, he had a personal stake in it when Obi-Wan told him that Vader murdered and betrayed his father. Plus, his aunt and uncle were killed by the Empire for them taking in C-3PO and R2-D2. There weren't enough character interactions between the original trilogy cast, and I find it disconnected when they inject a number of callbacks to 4, 5, and 6. People complain about the Easter eggs from Rogue One, but I feel like The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi are more in your face about it. How many times are we going to hear piece of junk when referring to the Millennium Falcon? Also, I expected Luke, Leia, Chewie, R2, and C-3PO to have more screen time together, but it was very minimal. I wanted them to at least reminisce about Han, but there was very little of that. I think this trilogy is starting to feel like it's different enough from the original trilogy, but it takes steps backwards in many aspects. Characters like Poe are given a lot more screen time, and I did enjoy that. There are a lot of unexplained things that happen in this film, as to how Rey is a fairly competent Force and lightsaber user. There needed to even be a small part of maybe Luke training Rey how to be a Jedi, so I could believe her to be as skilled as she is. They also fell into the same problem they did with Boba Fett, where Phasma and Boba are cool characters, but they have no time dedicated to them at all. There was a lot of filler in my opinion, with the Casino City being the prime example, and they should have cut that down or entirely. Snoke is dead already, who is the big bad, and it feels like Return of the Jedi, where it feels pretty final in terms of plot. There's still some plot left for J.J. Abrams to explore in Episode 9, but I don't feel the need to see the next movie the day it's released like it did with The Force Awakens or The Last Jedi. I do appreciate them trying to explore new directions for the franchise to go, but it fails to captivate me. I still feel like they need to take more things from the expanded universe, which is now the Legends. Here's what I wouldn't mind seeing the last movie to explore or reveal. I wouldn't mind seeing them do something similar to Jaina and Jacen Solo in Legends, where they are twins, and Jacen Solo becomes a Sith Lord, where Jaina is forced to kill him. But I don't know how they could tie that in, because I doubt Leia and Han would abandon their child on a random planet. Plus, Rey has already met them, so this direction is pretty improbable. They could have explored the Great Jedi, as I mentioned earlier, to truly bring something new to the Star Wars movies. You don't have to make it another light versus dark side struggle. Having not watched any teasers or official trailers until after I saw The Last Jedi, it had hints they could explore Grey Jedi. I was hopeful from the small amounts of story I did hear before watching the film. I can see this movie most likely going in the way of Kylo Ren either dying, turning back to the light side, or maybe killing Rey, though I doubt that outcome very much. This movie became predictable to me when they tried subverting your expectations and constantly doing that throughout the film. I find myself in agreement with others in that Return of the Jedi had the perfect ending for me, at least in the movies. The rebels win against the big bad Empire with the top two people in charge dead. I still feel like these movies are pointless and ruins what victories Luke, Leia, Han, Chewbacca, R2-D2, and C-3PO gained by the end of the original trilogy. When I heard this movie was possibly going to be like The Empire Strikes Back, I wasn't expecting many new things to be introduced. It's not like Empire Strikes Back, in fact. There are plenty of new things, but it's also worse in my opinion. And I don't think anything will ever top my standard of the best Star Wars movie with these new films.